Hello, my name is Joan the Time Traveler. I'm a time traveler from the year 2030. I will tell you my story today. First, let me start by telling you about Donald Trump. He will be elected president in 2016. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. To you, he's just a TV personality, but soon he'll be the chief executive. He will also be overwhelmingly elected in 2020, but that won't lead him to gaining a second term. You'll see what I mean in 2020. Speaking of 2020, you won't believe me when I say that things are going to get weird. The world you know is ending. The virus will be announced, and everyone will be wearing masks in your time period. It's going to get strange. Very strange. But the strangest thing of all will be, well, let's just say you'll hear from a man named Daniel Littell. You won't know who I'm talking about now, but you will. Soon. I came back to warn you. Stay away from Daniel Littell. If you hear that name, run the other way. It's all part of the prophecy. Planets are aligning. Conjunctions are happening. Secret societies have been talking about this moment for a long time. So don't ignore the signs. You won't believe anything I'm telling you now. I know it sounds crazy. I know the events of the future I'm warning you about sound far-fetched. But you'll know I'm telling you the truth when you hear about the Daniel Littell Show.
What? No. Sadly, I can't tell you about the future. I can barely remember the past. One of the things that jumps out at me, though, in studying the past, is John Locke, who wrote 2 treatises of civil government, first published in 1689. A lot of the assumptions of the Founding Fathers were based on Locke's thoughts on political science. Locke, for instance, was a big believer in natural law, i.e., the belief that we have rights that derive from God, and not from governments. Hence our founders' belief in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the book, Locke said something that jumped out at me. He wrote, "Who is the person who hath rights to my obedience, if there be no marks to know him by and distinguish him that hath right to rule over other men? It may be myself as any other. And therefore, though submission to government be everyone's duty, that signifies nothing but submitting to the directions and laws of such men as have authority to command. It is not enough to make a man a subject to convince him there is regal power in the world, but there must be ways of designing and knowing the person to whom this regal power of right belongs. And a man can never be obliged in conscience to submit to any power unless he can be satisfied who is the person who has a right to exercise that power over him. If this were not so, there would be no distinction between pirates and lawful princes. He that hath force is without any more ado to be obeyed, and crowns and scepters would become the inheritance only of violence and rapine. Men, too, might as often and as innocently change their governors as they do their physicians, if the person cannot be known who has a right to direct me, and whose prescriptions I am bound to follow. To settle therefore men's consciences under an obligation to obedience, it is necessary that they know, not only that there is a power somewhere in the world, but the person who by right is vested with this power over them." I like the phrase about the people having a right to change out their governors as they do their physicians. When I read that line, it immediately jumped out at me that since the whole global lockdown, we've been told that we can neither switch out our governors nor question the dictates of physicians. The reality is that physicians stand in a lower order of power than do the governors, hence why Locke says that they can be switched out easily. But today we're told that the physician is some higher power to whom we owe our obedience. Is this true, though? Who vested him with that power? Did you? Did the law? Who gives Bill Gates a right to control our public health policy? Who makes pharmaceutical companies outrank our political representatives? Where's this written? Of course, the leftists will argue that even if the pharmaceutical corporations and commercial pirates like Bill Gates don't derive their power from any law, it doesn't matter, because the politicians listen to them anyway, given their reliance on their cash donations for their campaigns. And, well, the Constitution calls for the government to look out for the general welfare. And isn't protecting the public from a virus the general welfare? If you take a little look into the Constitution, though, the phrase the general welfare is not vague and left open to interpretation. They use the phrase the general welfare, and then right under it, they give bullet points as to what the general welfare is. They enumerate these things as the general welfare: to borrow money on behalf of the country, to regulate commerce with foreign nations, to establish immigration laws, to coin money, to punish counterfeiters, to establish post offices and postal roads, to create a patent office, to create a navy and a militia. Note that in all these things, healthcare is not mentioned. The general welfare did not mean providing for your health care. It was not an open-ended grab bag upon which you could project anything you wanted. Just as the state wasn't responsible for getting you a girlfriend or feeding you bonbons or clipping your toenails. It's not a magical vending machine. Kind of reminds me of a book from 100 years ago called Confessions of a Monopolist by Frederick C. Howe. In the preface, he says, "This is the story of something for nothing, of making the other fellow pay." We've always been used to monopolists seeing government as a vending machine, but what's new is the assumption by the poor that they too can use government as a vending machine. Famous wit Oscar Levant said, "The only difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Democrats allow the poor to be corrupt too." It's why college kids want to offload their student loan debt onto working class people like bus drivers and plumbers. Bus drivers and plumbers didn't get the benefit of a college education and the economic leg up that such a thing gives you. But kids are being taught that it's okay for them to get the benefit and unload the cost onto those who didn't get the benefit, which incidentally made the news when Biden seemed to deny them last week. The point is, as hard as this is to hear, government is not a vending machine. That's not the job of the state. I'd like to cite Aristotle on this point, and I just may get in under the door too before he gets canceled by woke culture judging by the current news cycle. Before our ultimate tumble into illiteracy in the abyss, though, let me draw attention to the Greek philosopher who said that everything has a telos. A telos is an end goal. The telos of a refrigerator, for instance, is to keep your food cold. The telos of a toaster is to brown your bread. When something doesn't fulfill its telos, we call it a bad thing. For example, the telos of a car is to transport you, which is why we call it a bad car if it doesn't run. Aristotle said that government has a telos. He said that the basic functions of government are three things: establishing a military, doing infrastructure, and creating a judiciary. Healthcare is not the telos of government. It's the telos of hospitals. I don't know if you've noticed, but governments are not hospitals. Hospitals are hospitals. To expect government to take on that function is like going down to the DMV and demanding that they give you a back massage. How would the workers look at you if you took off your shirt, lay down on the floor, and demanded a shiatsu rubdown? They'd look at you like you were insane. To expect the government to be in charge of your health is like putting your ice cream into a filing cabinet and expecting it to keep cold, as if it were a refrigerator. The telos of a filing cabinet is not the telos of a refrigerator. And let's repeat, the telos of government is not to be a hospital. Governments are governments, and hospitals are hospitals. Two totally different institutions with two totally different teloses. According to our Constitution, you are responsible for your own health care, no one else. This is not some getting something for nothing and making the other fellow pay. It was not something promised you in the Constitution, so it is not and never was part of the social contract. So as John Locke says, upon what authority do governors claim the power to coerce your obedience in the name of your health? When you examine it, you realize they have no legal right. The law has never given them power over your health. It doesn't exist. The government is not charged with keeping you from getting the sniffles. That's not its job. And if the government has no constitutional authority to tell you to do anything, where does that leave Bill Gates?
What do you think the right balance is between the trade-off of protecting people's lives and the economic hit? I mean, do you see a situation where the global economy could be virtually at a standstill for a year or even more?
Well, it won't go to zero, but it will shrink. Global GDP is going to take, probably the biggest hit ever. Maybe the Depression was worse or 1873. I don't know. But in my lifetime, this will be the greatest economic hit. But you don't have a choice. People act like you have a choice. People don't feel like going to the stadium when they might get infected. It's not the government who's saying, okay, just ignore this disease. And, people are deeply affected.
Note in the clip that Gates says that the hysteria, panic, and social vapor lock will not come from government, but from scared, irrational Karens. What he leaves out, of course, is how these individuals become terror-stricken. The answer is media. Media that Gates has a hand in regarding founding outlets like MSNBC. The MS stands for Microsoft. Propaganda pioneer Edward Bernays wrote in 1928, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country." Invisible government? When Bill Gates tells you that these lockdowns and policy changes won't be driven by our official government, but by scared, panicked people, that's his admission that what's happening is not being driven by rule of law. As Locke said, "Who is the person who hath rights to my obedience?" A man can never be obliged in conscience to submit to any power unless he can be satisfied who is the person who has a right to exercise that power over him. If this were not so, there would be no distinction between pirates and lawful princes. So I ask it again. Who has a right to your obedience? If someone tells you that they have the authority to tell you how to dress or what chemical substances to put into your body, ask them to show you the law giving them that authority. If they can't summon anything to justify their assertion of power, then kindly tell them to take a long walk off a short bridge. They have only the power that you give them. And as for politicians, they are not your masters, they're your servants. It may be time to remind them. Thomas Jefferson said that a government is only legitimate insofar as it protects the rights of the people. If it doesn't do this, it isn't living up to its telos, as Aristotle said. Remember what a government is supposed to do: create a military to defend the borders. Is it doing that? It's supposed to do infrastructure. With a D- from the Department of Interior, is it doing that? Or how about creating a judiciary? When Trump tried to have his case heard in the Supreme Court, did they allow that to happen, or are the courts remiss as well? If the government isn't fulfilling its telos, it's by definition misgovernment. Imagine your refrigerator apologizing for not keeping your food cold, but promising instead to take on the functions of the toilet. Imagine a government that no longer defends the borders, does infrastructure, has a functional judiciary that protects the rights of its citizens. But don't worry, it'll now take on the telos of a hospital. In the face of such misgovernment, John Locke says, quote, "We are absolved from obedience when illegal attempts are made upon our liberties or properties, and may oppose the unlawful violence of those who are our magistrates, when they invade our properties, contrary to the trust put in them." Remember, your body is your property. 9/10 of human rights are based on property rights, the chief of which is your own body. If someone is claiming that Bill Gates has a right to your body and you don't
have a choice. People act like you have a choice.
They have violated your sovereignty and run afoul of the Constitution. There will, of course, be the conventionalists who are terrified of us if saying no. They'll try to frame us as domestic terrorists, as enemies of the peace, whereupon Locke says, they may as well say upon the same ground that honest men may not oppose robbers or pirates, because this may occasion disorder or bloodshed. If any mischief comes in such cases, it is not to be charged upon him who defends his own right, but on him that invades his neighbor's. If the innocent, honest man must quietly quit all he has for peace sake, to him who will lay violent hands upon it, I desire it may be considered what a kind of peace there will be in the world, which consists only in violence and rapine, and which is to be maintained only for the benefit of robbers and oppressors. Who would not think it an admirable peace betwixt the mighty and the mean, when the lamb without resistance yielded his throat to be torn by the imperious wolf? Locke adds, the end of government is the good of mankind. And which is best for mankind, that the people should always be exposed to the boundless will of tyranny, or that the rulers should be sometimes liable to be opposed when they grow exorbitant in the use of their power and employ it for the destruction and not the preservation of the properties of their people? Could reading the New American Magazine boost your heart health, support your immune system, and help you lose 20 pounds of unsightly fat? The answer is no, but you should read it anyway. It'll keep you informed and provide information that cuts through the noise of lesser news outlets. thenewamerican.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us on social media and hit that like button.